The afternoon sun was filtering through the kitchen window in a way that usually felt peaceful, but today it felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. Elara stood frozen at the kitchen island, her fingers trembling as she held the old leather-bound journal she had found tucked behind the loose brick in the basement. She had lived in this house for 18 years and never once suspected that her mother, a woman known for her kindness and her perfect garden, was harboring a darkness that could swallow the whole town. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she read the words written in her mother's familiar, elegant script. The dates went back 2 decades, and the names listed were people who had simply vanished from their small community. Elara felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead as she realized the mother she loved was a stranger. Just then the front door creaked open, and the sound of humming filled the hallway. It was her mother, Sarah, returning from the grocery store. Elara scrambled to hide the journal under a pile of mail just as Sarah walked into the room with a bright smile that now looked like a jagged mask. Sarah asked Elara why she looked so pale and if she was feeling unwell. Elara tried to force a smile, but her lips felt numb. She lied and said it was just a headache from studying too much. Sarah walked closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she reached out to touch Elara's forehead. Her hand was ice cold, and Elara had to fight the urge to flinch away. Sarah began to unpack the groceries, talking about the neighbors and the upcoming town festival, while Elara stared at the hidden journal, feeling the weight of 1,000 secrets pressing down on her. Every laugh Sarah gave sounded like a threat, and every casual comment felt like a trap. Elara knew she couldn't stay in this house another night, but she also knew that her mother never let anything go once it was in her grasp. The silence between them grew heavy and suffocating like a thick fog. Elara watched her mother handle a sharp kitchen knife to slice a melon, and for the first time in her life, she felt genuine terror in the presence of the woman who gave her life. She realized that the missing people weren't just names in a book, they were stories that had been cut short, and now she was part of the narrative. The kitchen, which used to smell like cinnamon and vanilla, now smelled like old dust and decay. Elara excused herself and ran to her room, locking the door and leaning against it until her heart stopped racing. She looked at her phone, wanting to call the police, but she realized she had no proof other than a book she had just hidden in the kitchen. If she went back down now, she might not make it back up. The sun began to set, casting long, jagged shadows across her bedroom floor, and Elara realized that the nightmare was only just beginning. She had to find out what happened to the people in that journal before she became the next name on the list. She sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the floorboards creak downstairs, knowing that her mother was moving around in the dark, waiting for the right moment to see if her secret was still safe. The night was thick and silent as Elara crept back down the stairs, her heart drumming against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed that journal back. The house felt different in the dark, as if the walls themselves were watching her and whispering her name. She reached the kitchen and saw the pile of mail where she had hidden the book, but her heart dropped when she realized the journal was gone. Suddenly the light flickered on, and there was Sarah sitting at the table holding the leather book in her hands. Sarah did not look angry, she looked disappointed, which was far more terrifying. She asked Elara why she was snooping in places she did not belong. Elara found her voice and asked her mother what the names in the book meant and why people had disappeared. Sarah stood up slowly and walked toward Elara, the journal clutched to her chest. She told Elara that some secrets were meant to protect the family and that the world was a cruel place that required hard choices. Elara backed away until she hit the cold surface of the refrigerator. She shouted that murder was not a choice and that she was going to the police. Sarah laughed, a dry and hollow sound that echoed off the tile walls. She told Elara that no one would believe a daughter who had a history of anxiety and overactive imagination. Sarah reached out and grabbed Elara's arm with a grip like iron. She told her daughter that she loved her and that everything she did was to ensure they had a good life. Elara struggled to break free, but Sarah was surprisingly strong. Sarah whispered that the people in the book were obstacles and that Elara was her greatest achievement. The realization hit Elara that her mother didn't see people as human beings, but as chess pieces to be moved or discarded. Elara managed to twist her arm and shove her mother back, sprinting toward the back door. She fumbled with the locks as she heard her mother's footsteps approaching fast. She burst out into the night air, running toward the woods that bordered their property. The branches clawed at her skin, and the ground was slick with mud, but she didn't stop. She could hear Sarah calling her name through the trees, her voice sweet and coaxing, as if she were calling a lost puppy. Elara hid behind an old oak tree, her breath coming in ragged bursts. She saw the beam of a flashlight cutting through the darkness, searching for her. Her mother was hunting her. Elara realized that the woman she knew was gone, and in her place was a predator who knew these woods better than anyone. She had to find a way to get to the main road, but the flashlight was getting closer. Elara noticed an old cellar door hidden under a mound of leaves near the edge of the clearing. It was a place she had been told never to enter as a child. With no other choice, she lifted the heavy wooden door and slipped into the darkness below just as the flashlight beam passed over the spot where she had been standing. The cellar was damp and smelled of wet earth and something metallic that made Elara's stomach turn. She fumbled for her phone and turned on the small light, and what she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't just a cellar, it was a shrine. The walls were covered in photographs of the missing people, but they were arranged in a disturbing pattern around a central chair. On the chair sat a tattered doll that Elara recognized from her own childhood. She realized that her mother had been recreating a version of her life using the belongings of those she had taken. There were letters addressed to Elara that she had never received and gifts that had never been given. Her mother had been living a double life for years, building a wall of lies to keep Elara in a bubble of safety that was actually a prison. As Elara moved deeper into the cellar, she found a trunk filled with IDs and wallets. She saw the ID of a young woman named Clara, who had been her favorite babysitter years ago. Everyone thought Clara had run away to the city, but here was her life sitting in a box in the dark. Elara felt a wave of nausea and grief wash over her. She realized her entire life was built on a foundation of stolen moments and stolen lives. Suddenly, the cellar door above her creaked open, and a sliver of moonlight cut through the dust. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, her silhouette dark and menacing. She didn't scream or shout, she just told Elara to come back up so they could talk like a family. Elara backed away into the shadows of the cellar, clutching Clara's ID in her hand. She told her mother that she knew everything and that there was no coming back from this. Sarah started to descend the stairs, her footsteps slow and deliberate. She told Elara that the world outside was full of people who had hurt her and that she was the only one who could keep her safe. Elara found a heavy iron tool on a workbench and gripped it tight. She told Sarah that she would rather be in danger in the real world than safe in a house of ghosts. Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs, and the light from Elara's phone caught the expression on her face. It was no longer the face of a mother, but the face of a woman who had lost her grip on reality. Sarah lunged forward, but Elara swung the tool, hitting a shelf and sending a shower of old jars crashing to the floor. In the confusion, Elara darted past her mother and scrambled up the stairs. She slammed the cellar door shut and slid the heavy iron bolt into place. She could hear her mother pounding on the wood from below, screaming that Elara would never survive without her. Elara didn't wait to hear more. She ran toward the house to get her car keys, knowing she had to get out of this nightmare once and for all. Elara reached the house and grabbed her keys from the kitchen counter, but as she turned to leave, she saw the journal sitting there again. She realized she couldn't leave it behind because it was the only proof of the horror hidden in the woods. She grabbed the book and ran to her car, starting the engine just as she saw the cellar door in the distance fly open. Sarah had escaped. Elara shifted into gear and sped down the long driveway, the gravel spraying behind her. She didn't look back until she reached the main road and saw the lights of the town in the distance. She drove straight to the police station, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the steering wheel. When she walked inside, the officers looked at her in shock as she was covered in mud and tears. She laid the journal on the desk and told them everything. The officers were skeptical at first, but when they saw the list of names and the detailed notes, their expressions changed to pure horror. A fleet of police cars was dispatched to the house immediately. Elara sat in the waiting room wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket, watching the clock. Hours passed before a detective came out to talk to her. He told her that they had found the cellar and the evidence she described, but Sarah was nowhere to be found. A chill went down Elara's spine. Her mother had vanished into the woods she knew so well. For the next week, the town was swarming with investigators and news crews. The story of the gardener, who was a silent killer, gripped the nation. Elara stayed with a distant relative in another state, looking over her shoulder every time she heard a door creak. She eventually learned that the police found Sarah's car abandoned near a cliff by the ocean, but no body was ever recovered. The journal was used to give closure to dozens of families who had spent years wondering what happened to their loved ones. Elara became a symbol of courage, but she felt like a ghost walking through a world that didn't make sense anymore. Months later, Elara received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small pressed flower from her mother's garden and a note that simply said, "I am always watching over you." Elara realized that while the secret was out, the nightmare might never truly be over. She looked out her window and saw a woman standing across the street wearing a familiar hat, but when she blinked, the woman was gone. Elara took a deep breath and realized that her life would always be a battle between the love she once had and the truth she now knew. She decided she would not live in fear anymore, and she began to write her own story, one that wasn't dictated by the shadows of her past. She would honor the names in that journal by living the life they were denied, and she would never let the silence win again.